Good morning, everyone. John Dickinson here in Sydney, office hours time. So it's about 20 past 9 my time in Sydney. So it's wonderful to be presenting to you live at a decent hour because obviously Boris FX is in Boston in the USA, and getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning's never fun doing a live stream. So it's good to be with my coffee in my hand and fully pumped, energized to spend the next hour with you just exploring 3D models in particle illusion. If you have any questions, just drop them in the chat. I'm going to be playing around with some things I've set up and just doing a little bit of exploration. But if you have a question, you want me to, go in a different direction, we can do that too. Hopefully I can answer the question. If I can't, we have other experts like Alan Lawrence, the creator of Particle Illusion, on the team. He's not here today, but I will be able to take your question, ask him, and get back to you. Okay, so I can already see that Michael's in the chat. Hi, Michael, and all things film. Try to say that 10 times fast. Welcome. It's good to have you in the chat, and it's nice to know that I'm not alone. So I'm going to just whip across to my screen. And, yep, that's looking pretty good. So let's see. I think I've got the wrong screen. Just one sec. Let's go display 1. There we go. It's always good to monitor your live stream on your other monitor. It would have been funny you seeing the hall of mirrors of me presenting on OBS. That would have been great, wouldn't it? Okay, should all be good now. So there we go. I'm back. All right. So like I said, we're going to be exploring 3D models, which is a new feature which was included in Particle Illusion 2022.5. And I'm working with Particle Illusion in Continuum in After Effects. And your first illusion of the day. That's right, Michael. Ta-da! I'm working in After Effects because that's the tool that I use. But 3D model import and using 3D models as emitters is also available in the standalone free version of Particle Illusion as well. So I'll be sure to point out where I'm using something that's not included in the free version, which is generally just things that are in the After Effects plugin version accessible through After Effects. Okay? So like I said, any questions, just let me know. All right. Hi, Jonathan. Belize. Wow. Sounds very exotic. Okay, so I've actually set up this example here. And 3D models in Particle Illusion is pretty new, obviously. And I haven't been able to use it for a long time. And I got used to the basics of it when I was putting together presentations for the release. But I hadn't done anything with text, with 3D text. So what I thought I'd do in preparation for this is just explore what can be done with 3D text models in Particle Illusion, and how far we can push it. What are the current limitations? So let's do that, because I think text is obviously in motion graphics is obviously a very big thing, especially 3D text. We might have also import a couple of other different models, but it's basically exactly the same workflow. So we're going to use text as the example. Okay. So I've got this little example here. So this is a 3D text model that was imported into Particle Illusion. And you can't currently render the actual 3D model in Particle Illusion. You can render the particles and you can render a wireframe, but you can't render the actual model. So I wanted to see if I could work out different ways of actually including a 3D model with my particles, because it makes sense that you'd have a 3D render and then you'd have all your particles, moving, falling off the render, or, it was bursting into flames or something like that. So I've actually done this using Boris FX Continuum's Title Studio with Particle Illusion. So we'll have a look at that in a moment. I did actually try Cinema 4D's Cineware feature in After Effects, but it didn't quite work the way I expected. So let's look at, you can see here, maybe if you have an eagle eye, that there are a few limitations from what you're seeing here, but let's explore it and I'll walk through those as well. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to start with a brand new comp, and we're going to start from the very basic. So we'll cover a few basic particle illusion features and techniques as well. So let's make a brand new composition. So 5 seconds is fine, HD is great. And there we go. I'm going to quickly save this. And let's see. So I work from home. I'm sitting at the desk at which I work every day, and I'm doing lots of motion graphics and graphics for Boris FX, and I'm exploring and experimenting, and I'm going to approach this exactly the same way I would approach it if I was working by myself and I wasn't, live. Okay, so this is exactly how I would work. So hopefully you get a sort of feel for my kind of workflow. So I'm going to make a new solid, and comp size, that's great, and I'm going to search for particle illusion. There we go, BCC particle illusion. Like I said, I'm using the plug-in version, but you can do everything I do inside particle illusion in the standalone free version as well. So I'll double click to apply that. Now we don't see anything. Nothing's actually applied to the solid, so I have to actually come over and click on launch particle illusion. And hopefully the crash gods will be with me today. They were yesterday when I was practicing this. All right, so here's the PI interface, and we're going to start super basic, right? You can see under custom, we have all these basic emitters, and I'm going to choose the most basic of basic emitters. Just double click that, and you can see over here in the node view, it's added an emitter and it's added a particle. Okay, so if I click play, you're not really going to see very much. That's my simulation. Okay, but I often like to start from basic emitters because presets are great, and I mean I also will use a lot of presets, but sometimes when I'm trying to create something very specific, untangling a preset and untangling a preset settings can be difficult. Sometimes it's great to start from the very basic settings because then everything's zeroed out. Flames 3D text into particle illusion. It's my dream. Nice. Okay. So let's make this look a little bit better. First of all, I want to be able to see it a bit better. So I'm just going to come over to my controls, and let's see, come over to basic emitter, and I'm going to increase, let's see, no, I'm going to click on the particle. Just in case you haven't watched the basic training for particle illusion, our free getting started training. The emitter has a number of different settings, parameters, that are the same as the particle. Things like size and life, but the emitter is just sort of like a multiplier of what you've got on the particle. So if the particle is set to 0, for example, on velocity, then no matter what I change the emitter's velocity to, it won't change it. Okay? So you have to have a value for one of these parameters greater than 0 on the particle in order for the emitter to actually make any difference. So I'm going to come over to the particle and make these changes. And let's see. I'm going to increase the number. I'm going to make that 1,000. I'll throw caution to the wind, so I've got a white blob here. And I'm going to increase the velocity so we can see these. So you can see how by using a basic emitter, changing one setting at a time, you really have control over your simulation. Okay, so let's just have a look at this. Nice, so I can see it now. You can see they're dying quite quickly, so I'm just going to increase the life. I'm going to make that 50. And take a look at that. Okay, so now at least we can see it. All right. Quick coffee sip. So who of you who are watching have used particle illusion? Now, next I'm going to click on the emitter, and I'm going to choose under shape 3D model. So 3D model was introduced in 2022.5 and allows me to emit the particles from a 3D model. All right, so that launches an import C4D file window, but you can use OBJ files. Now I've got mine up in this folder here. Got a few here. I'm going to choose 3D text. So it's a really simple 3D text model. So basically in Cinema 4D, I just typed in some text and extruded it. I'm a Blender user now, but it's not quite as easy to do text in Blender. Let's have a see how this looks. Okay, so at the moment, it doesn't look a lot different. You can see it's sort of clumping a little bit around the middle. So it's starting to work. Now, the best thing to do here to sort of see what's going on is to drop velocity down to 0. So for this, I'll just bring the emitter velocity down. And now you can see the text. Excellent. I hear you, Michael, although I don't use Flame. I did do Inferno training once. That was interesting. And I have used Flint. That was a long time ago, though. Okay, so that's the basic settings here for the emitter. And you can see it's not so good. It looks like we can only see a couple of letters or parts of letters. So let's take a look at the emitter settings. So I'm going to just twirl up a couple of these. Now, so model file is 3D text. This is the one we want to check. Emit from surface. So it's emitting from the surface. Now we do have emit from vertices. Doesn't change it too much. And we do have emit from edges. You can start to see a few particles around the edges. But what I want is emit from surface. But this text, if we come down and show wireframe, you can see now why the particles are clumping up. They're clumping up on the S and the O and the bottom of the U because that's where most of the vertices are. Because this text was, like I said, just a text file extruded in Cinema 4D. So I didn't make an even grid or anything like that. So luckily, Particle Illusion has a setting for that, and it's this one here, Subdivide Large Polys. So I'm going to turn off the wireframe for now and just check Subdivide Large Polys. So that's really good. It's really useful. So that spreads. So it's basically subdividing the object, and it's spreading the vertices across the object. If we turn on Show Wireframe now, you will notice that it still hasn't subdivided the wireframe. So that's not a visual thing for the wireframe. It's just for the particle distribution. Okay, so that's starting to look like text, isn't it? And if we just come to the top view, now let me just give myself some space here. I'm working at 1920 by 1080, so there's not a lot of room. And change render view to top. And there you can see that that text has extrusion, right? You can also change it to world view and gives you that off-axis view as well. All right, so I'm going to go back to render view. And let's make this look a little more interesting. So what I'll do is I'll bring the particle size down. Something like that. I want to change the color. Now there's a few ways to access the color. I can go directly over to the controls, or in version 2022.5, on the node icon, on the node, on the particle node, sorry, I can double click the color strip here. At the moment, generally you'll see this and it'll look like a gradient, but at the moment these are all white particles. So if I double click that, it's going to open up the gradient editor. So the node view is starting to get a little more functionality, which is really good. So I need to click to add another knot there, or another stop. And I want to make this fairly warm. I like nice hot particles. So I'll go from red to maybe orange. I'll bring one in the middle there. I'll leave that one at the dark orange and make this one light. How's that? That should be good. Okay. Now notice how the particles are all red though. If we play that back, you can see they start to turn orange towards the end of their life. So what we can do is come up to, let's see, under colors, under the gradient, color type full gradient. So it's over the life of the particles, it's going through that full gradient. So it's starting at red, then it's going through dark orange to light orange. I don't want that. I want it to be random gradient. So it's going to choose a color at random from that gradient. And there we go. Particles disappeared. So I know that's been a bug that's been reported. I'm not sure why that's still doing that. Alan's probably watching this going, So I'm going to leave it off random gradient. And I'm going to choose next key color. So rather than choosing a color at random from the entire gradient, it's choosing the actual key color, which is pretty much the same thing. Kind of the same thing, depending on how many knots you have. Don't suppose it would make a lot of difference. I guess it'd be a little bit more, a little less contrasty. I'm not sure why that random gradient's not appearing. Okay, it seemed to be okay before. Potentially I could be doing something wrong, but I don't think so. Okay, I'll file that one away. Okay, so let's see here. I'm going to click apply. I'm just going to save this. Quick look at this in After Effects. Okay, just quickly save so we don't lose anything if it crashes. I'm going to go back into Particle Illusion. I could save the Particle Illusion project file as well. All right. So what else do I want to do with this? Let's see. It looks pretty basic at the moment. What might be nice to do is use a little bit of turbulence on this. So on the particle, see position turbulence and size turbulence are set to 100. If I click on the emitter, you can see position turbulence and size turbulence is 0. So basically what I said before, if there's 0 on the particle, sorry, it's in reverse. They're at 100 on the particle and 0 on the emitter. So in this case, I just have to increase the emitter amount. So if I increase position turbulence, you can see we start to get this sort of warping on the text. And if we come up to the settings at the top under turbulence field, auto evolve speed set to 0. If I increase that, now we'll get this kind of wiggling. So basically this is like a big soft fractal noise map which is controlling the position of the particles, which is interesting. Not really what I want. So I'm going to bring the position turbulence down to 0. What I want to do is increase the size turbulence. And watch what happens to the size of the particles. Let's bring it up to 100. Let's see if that makes any difference. Yeah, you can start to see it. Let me just really crank it up. So if I really crank it up, now we're using that same sort of fractal noise map to map the size of the particles on the object, which I quite like. It gives this nice organic look. See how they're sort of moving around that object. Now, that's too much. I'm going to bring that down to 200. Something like that. I really wish I could get random gradient to work. I'm not sure why that's not working. That would work a little bit better. I've got repeats here. Let's go. I could change the repeats. Okay, if I go full gradient, but I increase the repeat amount, that's a bit better. Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted with random gradient. All right. Okay, so I'm going to just go with that for the sec. Click apply. Everyone's quiet in the chat. All right. Quickly save. So Particle Illusion has its own built-in cameras, and you can use those by all means in the Continuum version or the standalone version of Particle Illusion. I like to use the After Effects camera because it gives me more options. So I'm going to create an After Effects camera, just using a keyboard shortcut. That's Shift-Alt Control C, Shift Option Command C on Mac. And I'm going to just choose this default. Caps lock is on. I gave it the name caps lock, so I'm going to call it camera. Nice. And I like to control my cameras using a null because it makes it much easier to control. So I'm going to right click and choose camera, create orbit null. Okay. Now if I change any of the settings on the camera at the moment, nothing's going to happen. What I've got to do, if I just name this particle illusion, it's always good to name your layers. I have to come over to the particle illusion settings, and check use comp camera. Okay, then it's going to use the comp camera. It shouldn't actually change the position. Now just slightly. You can see the perspective changed just slightly. So now if I come up to camera orbit and hit R, just to solo the orientation and rotation, and I just change the Y rotation. So now particle illusion is using After Effects camera. So that's very useful. All right. I'm going to quickly go back into particle illusion again. And let's just turn on wireframe. So as I mentioned before, currently there's no way to render the text in particle illusion. All you can do is see that you can render the particles, or you can see a wireframe interpretation or a wireframe version of the 3D model. So what I want to do is I want to have a rendered version of the text. I'm just going to turn that off and apply that. And during my exploration of this, thinking that, look, I've used a Cinema 4D file, so why don't I just bring the Cinema 4D file into After Effects, and maybe that would work. So I've got the Cinema 4D file here, 3D text. I'm just going to drop that into the comp, Control /. And there's the text from Cinema 4D. Well, it's not very useful because it's using the Cinema 4D camera. So the Cineware effect is applied by default. And there is an option down here for camera. So if I choose comp camera at the bottom, it's going to put it up in the top left. So 0, 0. If I choose centered comp camera, it puts it in the center, but you can see it's not in the same position as the particle illusion text. So that's not going to work for me. And I can't move this because I'll get an error. It has to match the composition settings using the default transform values. So I could try and go into Cinema 4D and reposition this text, but if it doesn't work, if it's not designed in a way that works automatically, that workaround is just not going to work for me. I know that I'll probably shift it down in Cinema 4D and it probably still wouldn't register with the particles. High null object. So not ideal. So that's not there yet. I think it's basically because the interpretation of center of the comp between Boris FX and Maxon is slightly different. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation. So I couldn't use Cinema 4D text. So I'm going to just remove that. But I can use Boris FX 3D text. So one way to do that, if I just create a new solid, and I'm going to title this Title Studio, is to use Title Studio. So I'm going to apply Title Studio. And that gives me 3D text. Do a quick save. And I'm going to launch the UI. Now it's launched on my other monitor. I'm just going to bring it across here. Okay, so this is Title Studio. And I've got the default text. I could change this text if I wanted to, but I'm using a 3D model of text. So I'm going to actually delete that. and I'm going to import a 3D model. So clicking on these color bars here, add new media. I'm going to import 3D model and come up to that same Cinema 4D file, because title illusion, there you go, that's a combo. Title Studio can import Cinema 4D files. Title illusion, maybe onto something there. So there's the 3D text, double click, and there it is. Now here's the thing. Title Studio and Particle Illusion use the same camera. They use the same setup, the same coding. It's identical. So all I have to do is click OK. I'm going to come back and clean up this in a moment, but if I click Apply, there it is. It's right in exactly the right position. With Particle Illusion, I could choose Composite and composite it that way, but I'm just going to very quickly just change the blend mode to screen. So that's how you can get 3D or 3D model, your 3D model or 3D text, to work with the same camera with Particle Illusion by using Title Studio. So if I rotate this now, nothing happens, and who can guess why? Why is nothing happening? Who can guess? Come on. Why isn't the Title Studio text rotating? No takers. You're going to kick yourself. It's pretty easy, because I haven't told it to use the comp camera yet. I've got to use comp camera. I'm going to turn off use comp lights and click use comp camera. There we go. Okay, so that was weird. I looked at the chat when I was talking to you. Yeah, 3D camera. That's right. So use the comp camera, and now you can see that the particles are in perfect register with the text. It's the same Cinema 4D file inside Particle Illusion and Title Studio, using the same. It's the same 3D world basically. Okay, they are in separate. They are in separate apps technically, but they do use the same camera setup. Now here's some limitations. If I rotate a little further, well, you can see it now. We're not seeing, we're seeing the particles, all the time. So there's no, I don't know if you've heard of the term hidden line, where we don't, as an object rotates, you don't see the back faces of the object. It's almost like back face culling. It's a way of rendering without showing the back geometry. So we can still see all the particles. So I think Particle Illusion needs something where, because we can't put the text or render it either needs to be able to render text in Particle Illusion, or it needs something where when you're rotating around the object, it doesn't show the back faces. And that way we could do this. Some kind of clipping. But because they're particles as well, it's kind of organic, so you can't really tell. But the most important thing is that you can see it's in perfect register, which is really good. And Title Studio is not a fully fledged 3D application. It's an OpenGL renderer. There's no ray tracing. It's fairly basic, but often with text you only want to do something basic. So I'm just going to reset the wire rotation. Reset. And now my camera is got to come a little bit like that, doesn't it? How's that? That's better. Sorry, it wasn't quite in the center. Is that better? Yeah, good. Okay. So now grey text is not very exciting. So why don't we just adjust that text inside of Title Studio? Quick save. And launch the UI. All right, so I'm going to keep this really basic. First thing I'm going to do is, let's see, come to Material Styles. And if you can't see that tab, you just have to go to the Window menu. You can see Material Styles just there. I just want this to be super simple, so for the colors, you can see I've got it selected still from before. I'm going to choose colors grays and black and try and scroll down here if I can. Let's just click there and double click. So that applies the black material to the object. I can hold down, I think it's Control and space. I can get the hand grabber tool and I can navigate around the object. This is something I've asked for in a feature request for particle illusion as well. So hopefully that'll be added in the future. I like to be able to look around my object, especially for for lighting and see how the reflections are working, see how the specular is hitting the object. All right, so we can't really see very much in the render view. So I need to adjust the lighting. And what I'll do is in this view, I'm just going to change this to top, like that. Okay. So lights. Now to adjust the lights, I'm going to click on the scene and come up to controls and click on lights. So at the moment I'm using one light. If I turn that off, it completely disappears. So that light there is giving that little specular highlight. And if I move that across, if I can, I've got to make sure it's selected. I'm going to just move it here. If I move that across, you can see how the specular highlight moves across the object. I want to stick this in the center. And I might just come back to, let's see, my world view. Now I can move it. There we go. Just going to move that down a bit. Maybe to there. All right. That's really flat. So I need something that's going to ping off those bevels. Okay. So I'm going to turn on light 2. And that's basically in front as well. So light 2 needs to be repositioned. And trying to select that. It's not selecting for me. So let's just move that across to there. See if that works this time. I'm not sure why that's not selecting. Normally it does. So I'll move it this way. I'm going to bring it to there. And I'm going to change the distance. Bring it to just in front. And bring it across. So you can see, actually I'll bring it to the other side. So you can see it's actually starting to hit those bevels now. I'm going to bring this to, let's see, I want one view, single. I'm going to change that to render camera. There we go. All right. So I'll come back to lights and just move that around. I think that's good there. Let's change the distance. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so I want it to be pretty dark, but I just needed enough light on those bevels. Otherwise, those letters would be, invisible, black on black. Let's take a look at this. It's obviously still pretty dark, but we can go in and adjust that. Now, of course, we can use After Effects lights as well. If I just create a new point light in here, I might just change the color. Something like that. Nothing's happening at the moment. But with Title Studio selected, if I just use comp lights, you can see how that's colorizing it, which is quite nice as well. So you can use a combination. And I might like to, let's see, come to top view and just move that back. I can just see that there. if I move it back behind, and maybe go to custom view. There we go. If I hold down the Alt key, I can just orbit around my scene without affecting the camera, which is really nice. That's using this tool here. This is the orbit around cursor tool. So Alt or Option. It's a really nice way to position lights in After Effects, or position anything really. So moving that round behind the text. Just come around to the front and see if that makes any difference. You can see how that's starting to put a bit of warmth on the sides there. And you can put multiple lights in. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but just give you an idea of how you can combine Title Studio lights with After Effects lights. Obviously, if the particles are orange and the text isn't receiving any of that light, from the particles, then it's going to look a bit weird. But you could always do a color grade afterwards. Okay, it's going to bring that rotation down to 0. And I need to be in camera view. There we go. I was wondering why nothing was changing. That's because I was in the wrong view. Okay. It's at this sort of stage, I've still got a fair bit to do to it, but sometimes I like to just add a few sort of finishing effects early, just to see what it might look like with a bit of glow. Particle Illusion has its own glow settings, so I can just turn glow on, and you can see it starting to glow there. But just twirl open glow and increase the intensity, so we can get that pretty warm. There's also a threshold and a radius, so I can make them kind of hot. So that's quite nice. So we'll leave that like that. I think that's pretty good. Just drop that down a bit. You can see what a difference it makes when you actually have the rendered text. Let's quickly save that. And what I can do is try different adjustment layers. I'm going to try, let's see, BCC Fast Film Glow. Just to experiment with how that might look with an overall glow. And this is going to make the text glow as well. So I'll just decrease the threshold. So we start to get that, make that a little warmer maybe. And increase the intensity. So you've got a glow for the actual particles, but you've also got a glow. You can do a glow over top of everything. That's making that look a little hotter as well. So I'm just going to turn that off for now. Let's make the particles look a little more interesting. How are we going for time? Just going to check if you have any questions. Okay. Just going to hide myself for a moment so you can see the entire screen. Okay, so let's play a little bit more with particle illusion. I'm going to duplicate this layer. When I'm experimenting and building looks, I do like to just save things that I've got that I'm kind of happy with, just in case I make a mistake and I can't go back to it. I like to keep lots of versions. So we'll just keep that one, that duplicate, and we'll work on that one. Now, obviously, I've only got one emitter and one particle in here, but you can have multiple emitters, multiple particles. I do like to keep my particle illusion scenes fairly simple, mainly because I do a lot of comping in After Effects, and I like to composite my particles independently. Let's have a look here. and give myself a bit of space here. All right. So what can we do with this? Maybe I want a little bit of velocity in here. So I want the particles to move away a little bit, but not too much. So let's see. I don't really want to play around with velocity over life, but I do want sort of general velocity. So I'm going to change velocity variation to say 10. And come back to the basic emitter. And then I set velocity to 0. That's why we're not seeing anything. So let's make that 100 again. Bye-bye text. Okay, that's just been vaporized. So 100 is way too much. So I need to bring that way down. So one thing, you can see how now we're getting a little bit of velocity. It's making it look puffy. One thing that I've actually asked for particle illusion is some sort of setting where I could have velocity, but it would only affect a count on the particles or a percentage. So say you had 1,000 particles, then you'd have 100 of those which would receive the velocity. So that way you could have little bits falling off things. You can see here by changing velocity variation, everything becomes soft. But I want all the particles to cling to it, but the occasional one just to sort of lift off. You know, if I change the weight, just to drop off or shoot out. So that's something I've asked for in particle illusion. So velocity variation doesn't really work in this case. So what I can do is I could increase the variation and decrease the number down to 10 or even 2 like that, right? And just increase that velocity a little bit more and click apply. Now, but I could do this all inside of particle illusion just by using multiple emitters. But in this case, so now I've got the ones that are clinging to the text, and I've got the occasional ones sort of just flying out like that. And the thing about having them in here is that I can, change the blend mode. Maybe I prefer to have that at screen. Or sorry, add, make it brighter when they pass over. But that's already starting to look a little more interesting, isn't it? We've got those particles just doing that. Let's go into, we'll go into the same one. And just wait for it to launch. Yes, definitely all things film. The particles in particle illusion are 2D. They're 2D images or image sequences. So yeah, they're not 3D. Because it's designed so that they always look at the camera. Some of the ones that look like spheres and stuff, they look 3D, but they're not actually 3D objects. I'd like to get 3D objects as particles. That would be really cool. Yeah, you could use using 2 layers. So I was using 2 layers there. I'm actually going to use 2 emitters in now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate these. I'm going to duplicate this emitter just by clicking and choosing duplicate emitter. And for this one, I'm going to bring the velocity down to 0, but I'm going to increase the weight. So we have little particles falling off. And let's see. So weight's at 100, so I've got to click on the particle itself, and I've got to increase the weight here. And that's what I was talking about earlier. If this is 0, then the weight of 100 on the emitter won't make any difference. So just watch what happens over here on the stage when I increase the weight. So they start falling down. So we've got that kind of thing going on. But we don't want them all falling at the same speed, so we need to adjust the variation. So we've got weight variation. Where is it? Right there. watch what happens over here. Some of them will be heavier, some of them will become lighter. Like that. Because obviously, you know, if this was a real object, depending on what's falling off it, some things are going to be lighter than other things. Let's have the weight higher. Yeah, nice. One thing I could do with that too, just for giggles, is come up and I could turn on the line setting. So if I connect to birth position, you can see how I've connected a particle to the birth position of the particle that's falling down. So we get that. See how it's drawing those lines? It's quite cool. I'll leave that on for now and just take a look. And this is yeah, great for embers, frequency I/O. It's really good. There's some good ember presets in here as well. So let's take a look at that. You see how, remember we started with the basic emitter, the very basic emitter, and see how you can build it up quite easily by changing, you know, one parameter at a time basically until you get the look that you're after. And I will state again, once again, that I could have created this entire look in one instance of particle illusion. I just happen to have two here, and I like to work that way to combine them in After Effects. That's actually that looks quite interesting, depending on the look that you're after. I'd like to do something like this, and this is the motion graphics artist in me. Let me just save. If I go and add an adjustment layer, what's that? Control-Alt-Y, Command-Option-Y. There's an affecting continuum called twirl. And is it twirl? No, not twirl. I don't want twirl. It's called curl. I knew it was something Earl. BCC curl. So you can get that kind of look, but I don't want it to affect the text. So I'm on an adjustment layer. So I'm just going to hit Q and create a mask. And I think you get what I'm kind of going for here. If we just bring that to, say, there, and I just feather that, hit F, and go Y. This is why I like Continuum. There's so many effects in it. There's usually something to do what I'm trying to do. So if that, it looks a bit weird when it gets caught at the bottom of the text. I'd have to fix that, but let's just bring that to there and change the feather. And I'd probably have to add, I'd probably have to sort of break this up just by adding a few points here. Oops, what have I done there? Camera, I've just clicked off of it. Adjustment layer. You see, I just added a couple of points there, and I could just, move them around. It's going to undo that. Just to break up that hard line. Bring that up. Okay, so why aren't we seeing that? I'm in custom view again. Camera, there we go. And I'm just going to change the curl size. There's something about seeing those straight lines, just I'd prefer to see them a little bit more organic. So something like that. Now they're falling too fast. And the curls are going in the wrong direction. They're going upwards. So I'd make that 90 and make the speed maybe 10. And I know this is a particle illusion demonstration, but the idea is to see what you can come up with, with not just, a finished look with the 3D model, not just using a 3D model and not finishing it off. So that looks really interesting, and I hadn't planned to do that. It just sort of came organically. Moving a little bit too fast, but quite nice. So that lines effect is quite great for motion graphics. All right. So what I'm going to do now is come back to the original one. I'm going to turn that off. First of all, I'll just turn these lines off. Let's give that a moment. So I'll just turn the lines off. And where am I? Color lines, turn it off. And click apply. I could actually use different particles as well. Maybe for this one, I could try something different. That's quite interesting. And we can use motion blur as well. We'll look at turning motion blur on in the inside of After Effects. We can use it. We can turn it on directly in here, just by clicking on this button, Blur. I'm going to click apply. They do look a little bit more like embers falling off now. Let's take a look at coming over to the particle illusion effect, and under particle properties, I might just increase the number. It's nice that you can actually change some of the main settings directly in the controls directly in After Effects rather than having to go back into particle illusion. And what I'll do is I'll turn on motion blur by choosing force on. And just increase the velocity a little bit. Let's have a look. Maybe the size. Obviously, you see more motion blur if the particles are moving faster. Okay, so I'll leave that one as it is. I'm going to come back to this one. I want to make something a little more dynamic. Just going to quickly save. How are we going for time? Pretty well. Here I'm going to use a force object. Okay, so we're not using any velocity here, but I do want to have the particles move in a slightly more interesting way. So what I'm going to do is use a force. So I'm going to click on plus force here at the top, and as soon as I do that, it starts to move the particles to the right. You can see there's the arrow there. It's pushing the particles to the right. Now I'm going to use a sphere force, and I'm going to change the radius, and I'm going to just reposition this slightly. See if I can reposition it. You can see how that's changing the text. I'm going to put it into the center. Now at the moment, the default settings are causing the particles to be sucked in. I want to push them out, so I'm going to change the strength to minus, like that. See how that blasts them out? So it's pushing those particles outwards. And that's interesting and all, but I'd rather have them move in a more fluid, organic way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable fluid dynamics. That's better. Let's have a see how that looks. Let's have a see how that looks. That's good English, isn't it? See how they're being pushed out in a more fluid way? Much more interesting. And I like how they form and then they slowly start to be influenced by the force. Influenced by the force. Anyone see the Mando 3 trailer? Looking forward to that. I'm going to change the simulation detail to 16. There's not a lot of detail in there, so I'm just going to increase that. So I'm going to change it to 32. It's on 16 at the moment. Okay. So that breaks that up, and they get a really nice swirling effect. Let's make it stronger. So I'll go strength. Just crank that up. That's really blasting them out now. Probably a little too much. I can increase the viscosity. What if I make that 2? Okay, let's go with that. What I'll do is I'll turn on motion blur for this. And you can already start to see that kicking in. What I'll do also is come up to the project settings, and I'm going to change motion blur frames from 4 to 8. Obviously increasing this will increase the render times and the preview times. I just don't like those steppy particles that you can get with only 4. Okay, I'm going to click apply. Okay, so that's looking a lot different. So let's see how this looks. Yeah, looking good. I'm going to just rotate that camera. One thing I like to do too, just to have the particles appear to be influencing or affecting the text a little bit more. It's going to save that. I like to use some displacement. So let's see. I want to displace the Title Studio text. So I'm going to use, what could we could use a bunch of different things here. I'm going to use just the standard displacement map effect. Now BCC does have displacement as well. I might try that first. I'm calling it BCC, but it is just Continuum these days. So displacement map, and for the map I'm going to choose particle illusion, and this is the bottom one. And nothing's happening because I haven't chosen for my source effects and masks. You can start to see a little bit of displacement there, so let's just increase this. You can see how it's starting to displace that text. So as the clumps of particles pass in front of the text, we start to get this kind of displace effect. Less obviously where there's less particles. What you can also do is you could blur it as well. So you could use something like lens blur in After Effects, or I like to use compound blur, something I've been using for a long time. So I'll apply compound blur to the text. And compound blur can use a blur layer, so I can choose the same layer for the blurring. And once again, I also have to choose effects and masks. So that's actually blurring the text out as it passes in front of it. A little bit difficult to see on this one because the text is so dark. But what it's doing is it's actually blurring out the text as the particles pass in front. You don't want too much, but it just gives the illusion that the particles are affecting the text. And we probably want to go and, just change the color slightly. It's using curves. And come up to red and just increase the red. And maybe decrease the blue. No, we don't want to make it yellow. And we could do that. We could use curves. I actually like BCC looks. It's actually a free effect too. You can download this for free. Well, I know the Final Cut Pro version is free for sure. So if I choose BCC looks and just click, I'm just going to save this and click FX Editor. I've had years of experience and I do know how to color grade, but I generally just choose a preset and go, ooh, that looks good, and just choose a preset. So I just roll in here. Just try, different looks. That's quite nice. Basic bleach warm diffusion, burnt copper. There's so many presets, so I can just zero in. That's actually quite nice, making that text more blue, isn't it? Dreamy, bit of diffusion in there. That's pretty nice. Glamour, kind of like that. That's generally what I'll do when I finish the look. Is I'll do a bit of color grading over the top. How are we going for time? I think we're almost at the end of the session, so that doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's quite a nice look. Obviously, I can sit here for 3 hours and just play with this until I get a look that I really like. But that combination of particle illusion, you see how we've changed the size of the particles using the organic nature of size turbulence, and using multiple emitters and particles, some with more weight than others, some with more velocity, using using forces with fluid dynamics to move those particles away in interesting organic ways. You can get a pretty convincing, pretty nice look. And obviously you could make more, more flames or clouds. Maybe I could put some sort of flames behind that. But overall, I'm kind of happy with that look, considering it wasn't. I haven't spent too long on it. I did like those lines with the curl as well. Looks quite nice with a bit of extra fast film glow on there. Excellent. Just going to check if we have any more questions. Yeah, I can hide the 3D objects. So there's the particles. Let's have a look. Now, the particles are forming, but you can have some pre-run. So I could have like a second pre-run so the particles are there from the start. And I could move that force through the text. So I could have the text form and form the shape of the word or form the 3D model, and then just have that force move through it to have it sort of be blown away or wiped off, and have the particles move out in a fluid way. We're getting some sort of weird curling going on there because I still have that curl turned on, but overall not bad. And I could have these particles with the weight and the ones with the velocity also be affected by the same force, if they were in the same scene. So yeah, it's quite different from the one that I was mucking around with yesterday, but overall quite interesting. Okay, render speed difference. Yeah, well, it's more about more particles. So the more particles you have, the slower it gets. But particle illusion now compared to particle illusion a year ago is so much faster. I used to complain to Alan, it's too slow, you know. I've only got a few particles, but it's slowing down. But I don't have that problem anymore. You have to really throw a fair few particles at it to slow it down. It's got a really nice caching system. So you could get it to slow down if you go overboard, but you've seen what I've done here, and it's rendering very quickly. Okay, last chance to ask any questions, any more questions live. One thing you should definitely check out on the website. Let me just see if I can find this. Oh, I've actually got it as a favorite here. It's a bookmark. So we have a series of getting started tutorials. I've recorded these along with our very own Ben Brownlee, and they're right up to the latest 2022.5 version. So if you really want to understand particle illusion, just work through these, step by step. And there also is one on 3D models. So I talk more about the specific settings for 3D models. Can the effect be ramped? You can, yes. You can have, there are over time settings, Jonathan. So I can have velocity over time, weight over time, and there's a timeline for that. So I can do nice curves, definitely. Maybe that's something we can look at in the future, just different ways to animate particles. If you have any things that you would like to see in a future session like this, just leave it in the comments, and I'll definitely give it some thought. Hey, Sleaze. I'm going to be shooting in just a moment. Before I do, just give you a chance to ask any more questions you might have. I'm just going to go into particle illusion and show you what I mean about those over time settings. So if I select, that's the ones with the weight, come down to the bottom here. See how there's size over life, velocity over life, weight over life. So currently weight over life is 100. And if I bring that down, let me just zoom here. It's going to auto zoom and refit. Bring that down to 0. Then they're going to have no weight at the start of their life, the particle's life, and they're going to be fully weighted out at the end of their life. So they should be much slower at the start. Yeah, you can see they're just holding there, and then they start to fall. So that's what you mean by ramping, right? Boris FX related question. I can try and answer that. Just drop it in the chat. While you're doing that, I'm just going to quickly change those back to something a little more round. Okay, I'm trying to. Let's see if I can do it up here. There we go. Just going to go back to a basic blur. Okay, if you have a question, Sleaze, just leave it in the comments, and we can answer it there. But listen, thanks for hanging out with me. I know you're all around the world at different times. We'll be doing these regularly. Next week will be another member of the team. But I'm more than happy to do these more frequently if there's more things that everyone wants to see. It'd be interesting to do some stuff that sort of blend Boris FX related as well. Can you render from within PI and hide the 3D model with only the particle effects rendering? Of course. Yeah, you can render from directly within PI. And this is, of course, as well if you have the standalone. If it's in After Effects, you'd render directly in After Effects. But you can render as well. And I haven't rendered from here for a long time. I've got to find where the actual, there it is, down here on the right. If I click render. Now you can render to ProRes, which is probably what you'd do. Render to ProRes with an alpha channel. So I would choose, probably ProRes 444 straight alpha. And, then you can render that out and comp that wherever you like in your editor, wherever you want to use it. Yep. Now, but the 3D model is an After Effects layer. So you could render out of After Effects by turning that Title Studio layer off, render with an alpha, using After Effects render settings, render window, or you could render it directly here in Boris FX. Particle illusion. Okay, leave any other questions you have in the comments, and I will see you in the next session. Thanks, everyone.